something you said over Yantif for a couple minutes? I still have 2 minutes to go before.
I'll say Kleina Machshava. There's a the Mishmur brings down, not the Mishmur, I'm sorry, the Shari Tshuva brings down from the Mekubalim an Indian to take the Dal Minim and the Sukkah. And the Shaila is exactly what the connection between the mitzvah of Dal Minim and the Sukkah is. So obviously, if it's from the Mekubalim, it's Al Pisaid. We're not going to say something about that, but with the Arkenu, a Machshava, the Indian of the Sukkah, we know, is Zecher to Sukkah Shafti, it's Kapasket and Tur Zecher Anani HaKavod. The Ramchal explains that the idea of the Anani HaKavod is Hashgacha Pratis Atzuma. He says a lashon that it's an Indian of that Klal Yisrael is Nesum in Haaretz. It's the Bnei Shloim. They're completely l'mayla miderech hateva. They're in a situation of they're in the midbar, but they're ragelcha loy batzeka, and they're not being hit by the wind. There's no nachash, there's no akrav. They're being completely wrapped. He said, "V'veni yivayneni yitzrenu ke'isha ein." The Rebbeinu Shalom is wrapping them completely in his embrace. He's holding them like a mother kagamel alei imay. And that's what we are. That's what the hekef of the Anani HaKavod of the Sukkah is. It's bitachon. Now, in order to go to that maila, how are we zeicha to be in the Anani HaKavod? Not everybody was in the Anani HaKavod. There were people that were pilot on. When we take our einayim, we take all of our reshe evarim, and we are magbia them to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and we say that we are miyuchet to you, we're chelek Hashem Amay. So in that sense, we're zeicha to go into the Sukkah and be zeicha to that maila of Chelek Hashem Amay, and to be zeicha to that Hashgacha Pratis Atzuma. If we're completely dedicated to the Rebbeinu Shalom and we're mekadesh ourselves, we are magdia ourselves, we menif ourselves to the Rebbeinu Shalom, then in that sense we should be zeicha to go in and be zeicha to that type of Hashgacha. Okay, I think it's 11.
Okay.
It's 11:01.
Everybody say I want to thank Rabbi Stern for coming, as I mentioned earlier, for coming on a busy time of Chol Hamoed, busy from so many different angles. To be able to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Hilchais from Talmud Torah and Hilchas Chag B'Chag. Rav Stern.
Okay, thank you very much.
We can put on certain basic Mekayim. If you want to put the Beer Lach on the screen, it's your call. You let us know. I'm
going to get to the Beer Lach in a little bit. I'll start. I'm going to start a little bit with a different akdama, and then we'll get to the Beer Lach in Meretz Hashem. And I'd like to speak today about the inyan of KAVANAH, mitzvah shrichas KAVANAH, and KAVANAH in general, while sitting in the sukkah. And as akdama, I'd like to bring down a bach, which may be very shver in a certain sense. We know that in general, when it comes to mitzvahs, we have a halacha in Siman Samach and Shulchan Aruch. The Mechaber brings 2 days. Yesh emer the mitzvahs are ein tzrichas kavanah. Yesh emer the mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah v'chein halacha. We paskin that when a yid comes to do a mitzvah, we paskin al kaponim by the Raisa. And the basic halacha in Shulchan Aruch is that when a person wants to be mekayim a mitzvah, he has to be mechavein lotzei yidei chayvasei ba'osei mitzvah. We have to have kavanah to do the mitzvah. Now, generally, that kavanah is a kavanah lotzei. So a person has to have kavanah to be yait to the mitzvah, and he has to have kavanah to be yait to that particular mitzvah that he's coming to be mekayim. Now, the Bach in Hilchas Sukkah focuses on the fact that the tour begins by Sukkah's Teish V'Shivas Yom Mitzvah Matafrei Shchafei Teish Shivas Yom L'man Yedu D'Harseichen Ki B'Sukkah Shafti Es B'nei Yisrael B'Yitzei Siyosam. So the tour goes into a whole agadic preamble about what the mitzvah of Sukkah is all about. Talak Kosim Mitzvah B'Yitzias Mitzrayim V'chein Harbe Mitzvahs, and he goes to talk about Zeichel Yitzias Mitzrayim and talk about the Anani HaKavod. And the Bach in Siman Tafrei Shchafei focuses on the fact Ikol Made the B'Divrei Rabbeinu she'ein zeh midarkoi b'chiburoi zeh levayer hakavana b'shum mikra shebetayra loiba rak lifsak hera lohayris minig upai herich levayer v'lidrash hamikra b'sukkos teishvu. So the Bach is disturbed by the fact that the tour is coming to explain the Taimei HaMitzvahs, when in general he does not explain the Taimei HaMitzvahs. So the Bach says, Yirali Leimer Bezesh Seivar, he explains that the tour holds that since the pasuk says, L'man Yedu Deirei Seichem Ki B'Sukkah Shavti Es B'nei Yisrael, since the Torah specifies that the purpose of the mitzvah is L'man Yedu Deirei Seichem, So he says, so therefore, shesoiver the kavan dechsev l'man yedu loikiyam ha-mitzvah ketikunem loyeda kavanas ha-mitzvahs HaSukkah lefi pashta u'lechein dir lefi ha'pshat teker kavanah b'yeshivas HaSukkah sheyizker yitzias Mitzrayim v'zeh tam ba'atzma l'Rabbeinu ma shekasa b'hilchas sukkah b'hilchas tzitzis in siman ches. So he says like this. He says the Bach comes to explain that there's a concept that besides the regular kavanah, the concept of mitzvah strichas kavanah, he says when the Torah specifically speaks out that we're supposed to do a mitzvah leman, we're supposed to have in mind a specific reason that the Torah wants the mitzvah to bring out, leman yedu d'retzechem ki b'sukkos hayshavti. So therefore, that kavanah is ma'akev in the kima mitzvah ketikunai, and a person is not yaitza the mitzvah ketikunai unless he has that in mind. So therefore, the Bach says that when a person sits in the sukkah the first night and he eats his kazayas, his kabeya, he eats his kazayas pas. So it's not enough to have in mind to be yaitza the mitzvah of sukkah, but he also has to have in mind the hekav anani hakavid and leman yedu deresechem yitzias Mitzrayim and the hekav anani hakavid. That's what the Bach says, and he says we find this in two other places as well. We find this in Siman Ches, that the Torah says the iskavein, when you put on tzitzis, he says the person has to be miskaven luman tizkru. It's called, the asism is called mitzvahs Hashem. And that he says, because again, when by tzitzis, the Torah says that there's a leman to the mitzvah. And he says by tefillin as well, we have this halacha. He says this in over here in Siman Tafresh Chafei and in Siman Ches as well. So the Torah says by tefillin, it says, by tefillin, it says, so the Bach says, and he learns up in the Lashon of Torah, that when a person puts on tefillin, he also has to have in mind that he's putting it on, kavanasa, that when he puts it on, he has to have in mind a special kavanah that he's doing it to remember, to remember all the mitzvahs Hashem. So the Bach is saying that by these three mitzvahs, sukkah, tzitzis, and tefillin, there's a special kavanah that a yid has to have when he does the mitzvah for the leman of the mitzvah. Leman tizkar, leman yedu deresechem by sukkah, and leman tizkar the mitzvahs and the Torah by tzitzis and tefillin respectively. Now this new kavanah, the Bach says a lashon that you're not mekayim the mitzvah ketikuna. What does that mean? So the Pri Megadim says, and as they bring the Mishtabru halacha, that this kavanah is not ma'akev. Avad, the person l'chatchila has to have this kavanah in mind, but if a person neglects to have this kavanah, he's still yaitz the mitzvah. L'maisa in Siman Ches, the Bach's lashon is a little bit sharper than it is in Siman Tafresh Chafei. His lashon is yoyre ki ikra mitzvah v'kiyuma tolu b'kavanasa sheyichaven b'shas kiyuma mitzvah. Mashenkin shar mitzvahs the yoytzi yudei chayvasai af al pi shelo yichaven b'davar kiyum shayisa mitzvah l'shem Hashem. So the lashon of the Bach in Siman Ches is that by these three mitzvahs, ikar mitzvah v'kiyuma toluya b'kavana. You have to have this kavana. Mashenkin shar mitzvahs the yoytzi yudei chayvasai. The lashon of the Bach in Siman Ches is mashma that without these kavanas, a person is actually not yet to the mitzvah. So he mentioned that the Pri Megadim holds that this is not ma'akev b'di'evet, but the Bikuri Yankiv in Siman Tafresh Chafei says klar that this kavanah is ma'akev. He brings the Pri Megadim, the Bikuri Yankiv Tafresh Chafei Sifkat and Gimel, and he says the Kosovite he brings that the Pri Megadim says shekavanas elu enim rak lechatchila avu b'di'evet yotze kishleikivin rak lotzeis. The mitzvah strichas kavanah lotzeis dafka. So there lefiani is daiti ein zeraya. Zed dafka b'shar mitzvahs shaloi tzivsa Torah kavana pratis bahem. Avol sukkah shetzivah akasif sheyichaven kein leman yedu yeshleim rafidu b'di'evet lo yatsa. And he says if a person eats laila rishana b'sukkah b'loi kavana zu yesh lahachmer v'lechol shuv kizayis b'kavan. So the Bikuri Yankov holds that this kavana is ma'akev, and we mentioned it's a little bit more mashma like that from the lashon of the Bach in Siman Ches. And he says if a person eats a kazayas pas in the sukkah the first night without the kavanah of leman yedu deresechem, he should go back and eat again. And he says al kaponim yizer kol echad l'lamed l'sapar l'banav l'bnei beisa b'layla b'shayna kavanas mitzvah sukkah, because without that you're not yaitza. That's what the Bikuri Yankov holds. So l'chayra, according to the Bikuri Yankov, it comes out l'chayra there's no makom to be machalik. We would say that hu adin by tzitzis and by tefillin as well, if a person's not mechaven when he puts on the tzitzis, in order to remember all the mitzvahs of the Rebbeinu Shalom, or by tefillin, in order to remember the Torah and the mitzvahs, he wouldn't be yaitza tefillin and tzitzis and sukkah. That's the L'chaira what comes after the B'kur Yankiv. Now, L'chaira, this B'kur Yankiv is very shver. I had a starka kasha, and I found that the kasha is partially asked in the Tosefes Bikurim, in the back of the second printing of the B'kur Yankiv. So there's a Tosefes Bikurim in which there's shilas that various people sent the B'kur Yankiv, at Langer, the Archlener, and the Tshuvas that he sent to, so he answered some of them back. So there's a kasha that's asked by Rabbi Yitzchak Deva Levi Bamberger, who's the Rav in Würzburg. So he asked the starka kasha on the B'kur Yankiv. He said, how is it possible to say that this special kavanah that you need to have by sukkah is ma'akev l'kulei alma? According to that, it would come out, l'chayra, according to the way the B'kur Yankiv is learning the Bach, that even though in Kol HaTorah Kula we have a machlokes, if mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah or mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, but it's going to come out that by tzitzis, tefillin, and sukkah, kuli amalei pligi, mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, because if a person sits in the sukkah without the kavanah of l'man yedu derasechem, he's not going to be yaitz. Now we have a Gemara. The Gemara is in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Ches in the base, and it's also a Gemara in the beginning of Berak HaMaitzi Tefillin and Erevin. That the Gemara makes a tliya between the machlokes, if you hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah or mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavanah, with regards to the Isser of Bal Taisif. We know that if a person does a mitzvah al kopanim bisman, the Gemara has a discussion chalukim bisman and not bisman. I don't want to get into the pratim of Bal Taisif right now, but the Gemara has a hanacha that if a person he's meisif on a mitzvah. Let's say, for example, the Gemara is talking about hayoshan b'shmini b'sukkah. If a person sits in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, let's say in Eretz Yisrael, Mashal, person sits in Shmini Atzeres in the sukkah, would he get the lav of Bal Taisif or not? So the Gemara is taila it that in order to be over the Isser of Bal Taisif, does a person need to specifically sit in the sukkah with kavanah to do it as a mitzvah? Then he's adding on to the mitzvah of sukkah. Or even if a person sits in the sukkah without specific kavanah to do it for a mitzvah, would that still be Bal Taisif? The Gemara in Erevin is talking about a case where a person finds tefillin on Shabbos and he wants to put on pairs of tefillin and carry them inside. So the Gemara is discussing, could you wear 2 pairs of tefillin? Wearing 2 pairs of tefillin, l'chayr will be a shayla of Bal Taisif. Let's say a person puts on 2 pairs of tefillin and he doesn't have kavanah to be doing it for a mitzvah, but he's wearing 2 pairs of tefillin. Is he over Bal Taisif because l'maisa seif kol seif he's wearing 2 pairs of tefillin, or he's only over Bal Taisif if he puts on the 2 pairs of tefillin and has kavanah to put on the 2 pairs of tefillin to be yaitza the mitzvah of tefillin with 2 pairs, not with 1 pair. So the Gemara makes a tliya that l'chayra, the Gemara makes a tliya that it's totally in the Manda Omer mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah or the Manda Omer mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara says if you hold that lotzeis by kavanah, that in order to be yaitza mitzvah you have to have kavanah, you have to sit in the sukkah, you have to have kavanah to do the mitzvah, kavanah to be yaitza the mitzvah. So then huadin lavar would be by kavanah. To be over Bal Taisif, a person would have to sit in the sukkah with kavanah to be doing a mitzvah. And Memele, if he sits in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres and has kavanah to be doing it for a mitzvah, Shmini Atzeres in Eretz Yisrael, let's say, to be sitting in, to be to the mitzvah of sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, so then he's going to be over Bal Taisif. But if he doesn't have kavanah, so the same way, according to the Mandar, mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. Without kavanah, you're not yaitze the mitzvah on Yantif. Without kavanah, it's not called a mitzvah, and you're not over Bal Taisif on Shmini Atzeres. That's what the Gemara says. But the Gemara says, according to the Mandar, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, and lotzeis loy bay kavanah. A person who sits in the sukkah on Yantif, on sukkahs, without kavanah is still yaitze the mitzvah. So who adin l'chayr? The Gemara asks that a person who sits on Shmini Atzeres in the sukkah would be over Bal Taisif even without kavanah. So that's the Gemara's tliya. The Gemara makes tliya. The Gemara comes out that shloi bisman is different, but that was the Gemara's tliya. Frakter Yitzchak Dov Bamberger. How could the Gemara say that according to the Manda Amar mitzvahs ein tzrichas kavanah, a person who sits in a sukkah is yaitz the mitzvah without kavanah? Who adin if a person who sits in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, he should be over Bal Taisif even without Kavanas mitzvah. That means that there is a manda amar mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah by sukkah. Frekter of Bamberger, that l'chayra, according to the Bikuri Yankov's laning in the back, there's no such thing as a manda amar mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah by sukkah. Because by sukkah, everybody holds you're not yaitz if you don't have kavanah l'man yedu deresechem ki b'sukkah seishafti as b'nei Yisrael. So everybody's masking that a person is not yaitz to the mitzvah of sukkah without kavanah. So if that's the case, how could the Gemara say that according to the Madar Mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah, a person should be over bal taisa for sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres even without kavanah's mitzvah? There's no such thing as a Madar Mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavanah by sukkah. That's the Mitzvah Bamberger's kasha on the Bikuri Yaakov. And the Bikuri Yaakov says teretz to answer this kasha, and his teretz is the chayra is not miyashiv, a similar kasha that I wanted to ask for the Gemara in Eruvin. As I mentioned before, the Gemara in Eruvin has a similar tliya. The Gemara in Eruvin, this machlokes Tanakama, the Gemara in Tzadikei in Eruvin, has a machlokes in the Tanakama and Rabban Gamliel. If a person who finds tefillin on Shabbos can wear them zug, or you can even wear two pairs. Machlokes Tanoim, if you can wear two pairs of tefillin to save them, or you can only wear one pair at a time. The Gemara has a number of different ifanim to explain what the machlokes is. One of the ifanim, according to the girsa that Rashi comes out with, is the Gemara wants to say that it's totally in the machlokes mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, mitzvah ein tzrichas kavanah. If you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, so then when a person puts on tefillin with kavanah, he's yai to the mitzvah. And if the person puts on tefillin without kavanah, he's not yai to the mitzvah. So then, according to that madar mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, the Gemara says a person can wear two pairs of tefillin on Shabbos to save the tefillin. He doesn't have kavanah to do it for a mitzvah. He's just putting it on for a tachshit. He's not doing a mitzvah. So it's not a mitzvah. So then he's wearing two pairs of tefillin, but he doesn't get bal taisif, doesn't get the lav of bal taisif, because since you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, and it's not a mitzvah without kavanah, so the two pairs of tefillin that he's putting on are not b'tairis mitzvah. So he's not over bal taisif. So the Gemara, Masha'enkin, according to the Madar Mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah. If a person puts on a pair of tefillin, even without kavanah, the etzem mitzias of putting tefillin on his guf is a kiyam mitzvah. Kum techaytz, if a person puts on two pairs of tefillin, even without kavanah, he's doing two ma'aseh mitzvahs of tefillin b'vasachas, which is bal taisif. So according to the Madar Mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah, you cannot put on two pairs of tefillin because it would be the isser of bal taisif. That's the Gemara in one lashon of the Gemara according to Rashi. So kum techaytz, it's a mefursha Gemara that there's a manda amar mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah by tefillin, and by just merely putting tefillin on without any kavanah at all, it's be'etzem a kiyam mitzvah to the extent that if you put two pairs on, you're going to be ever bal taisif. The kasha is, according to the Bikuri Yankov's laning in the back, there's no such thing as mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah by tefillin, because everybody holds that without wearing tefillin, without kavanah of without having in mind to be yaitz the mitzvah of tefillin and to remember all the mitzvahs that we're supposed to remember, the ganze l'shem yichud. So v'meila, a person is not yaitz the mitzvah of tefillin. Kum teches kuli amalei pligi mitzvah tzrichas kavanah by tefillin. So how could the Gemara say that there's a madar mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavanah by tefillin? L'chayr, it's a kushya tzuma on the Bikuri Yankov's laning in the back. So I want to suggest a mahalach that in order to get into this, we have to get a little bit further into the musig of mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah by sukkah. Let's start. So if we go back to the mitzvah of sukkah, we mentioned that the Bach has his mechudesh kavanah that in order to mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah ketikunai, a person has to remember l'man yedu deresechem ki b'sukkah seishafti es b'nei Yisrael. But milvad zois, the Bach mentions, the Bikuri Yaakov mentions, is the basic halacha, mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. So a person, l'chayr, when he sits in the sukkah, milvad zois, he has to have in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah of b'sukkah seishafti yomim, the mitzvah of yeshivas sukkah. Now, the Bir Halacha in Siman Samach says a very mechudesh halacha. In the Bir Halacha, Dibra Masel V'yesh Em Tzrichas Kavanah mentions Pirush Min HaTorah. He says a person, in order to be yaitz to the mitzvah, a mitzvah midiraisa, he needs to have kavanah lotzes. But then the Mishmur says like this. He says v'da the chol zeh b'sharei hamitzvos. Avol mitzvah hatoluya atoli ba'achila kigoyin kizayis matzah b'Pesach v'hu adin achilas kizayis b'sukkah b'layla rishayna das ha'shulchan aruch l'kamon b'simen tov ayin hey sif dalid to yotze b'diyeved afilu imloy kivein. The Bir Halacha says, he says that we have a halacha in Hilchas Matzah that if a person, even though we pass a mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, but in Siman Tov Ayin Hey, the Mechaber paskins a Rambam that if a person eats matzah below kavanah, he's yotze the mitzvah. Now, what's the pshat in this Rambam? The pshat in this Rambam is as follows. There's a Bavus the Shaila, there's a famous Stiris HaRambam. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Ches brings down a case, Sholchu Leila Avud de Shmuel, Kafu V'achol Matzah, so they Avud Shmuel paskin that you're yaitza. If a person is forced to eat matzah, he ate it without kavanah l'shem mitzvah. So the Gemara, Avud Shmuel says that you're yaitza. The Gemara wants to say from this, Shema Mina, that we hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavan. And there's an entire shaklavitaria in the Gemara, the entire sugya of the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis, back and forth. If you hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavan, and mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavan. Hatakei l'shir, if someone blows a shofar, and he doesn't have in mind to be yaitz the mitzvah, he's blowing the shofar just l'shir. Are you yaitz the mitzvah tkiyah shofar or not? Now, b'pashtus, most Rishonim learn that the maskana of the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah is mitzvahs tzrichas kavan. That's how Pashtus the Rambam learns. Rav Zera said, "Chavanu tekali." You need kavanah to be yaitz the mitzvah of shofar. So, and that's how the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Shofar. You're not yaitz the mitzvah of shofar below kavanah. So, all the Rishonim, the Ran, and many other Rishonim ask a stira: how could it be that the Rambam, although he paskins mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, and you're not yaitz the mitzvah of tekiyas shofar without kavanah, but the Rambam still paskins the halacha of Avud Shmuel that if a person eats matzah without kavanah to be yaitz the mitzvah, he just eats a kazayis matzah without kavanah to be yaitz the mitzvah, he is yaitz the mitzvah. Charles, what's the difference between matzah and shofar? So the Ran says that the Rambam learned that the Gemara, that even though l'maskanas Gemara we hold mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, but the Rambam paskind legabe matzah ain't tzrichas kavanah. Why legabe matzah ain't tzrichas kavanah? This is how the Magen Avram explains in Siman Tov Ayin Hey as well. That the halacha is that there's a principle called misasek b'chalavim va'arayis chayiv shekein nena. There's a halacha that if a person, let's say for a person does an iser chayiv krisis, so he brings a carbon chatas. He only does that if he does it, if he does it by misasek, he didn't know what he was doing when he did it. He ate chaylev, he did a maisa, he had no idea what he was doing. It's Machal Shabbos, but he was misasek, he had no idea what he was doing. He doesn't bring a carbon chatas. Let's say he eats chaylev by misasek. So the halacha is misasek b'chalavim v'arayis chayiv shekein nen. Even though there's a concept called misasek, that if a person does something without intent, he doesn't know what he was doing. So the halach is he's not chayav v'chatas for doing an avera b'misasek, but if he does an avera that has hana, he eats chaylev, he eats a shtickle chaylev. So because he has hana, the halach is he's mechuyev to bring a carbon chatas. Misasek b'chalavim v'arayis, with chaylev or an arayis, he's chayav to bring a carbon chatas, shekein nena. So Rashi and the Ran apply this to mitzvah tzrichas kavanah as well. The Ran explains the Rambam. He says like this. He says, even though we paskin that in order to be yaitza a mitzvah, a person has to have kavanah lotzes. And if a person does a nice mitzvah and he doesn't have kavanah lotzes, he blows a shofar, he doesn't have kavanah lotzes, he's not yaitza the mitzvah. But if a person eats matzah, since he's shekein nene, since he had hana from the matzah, so the halacha is that by a mitzvah midi da'achila, since he has hana, just like by a carbon chatas we say, the hana makes it as if he was mechaven, makes it ois misasek, and then he's chayav chatas. Who adin if a person does a mitzvah that he's nena from? So such a kind of, if he does that mitzvah and he's nena, it's like kavana, and he's yaitz the mitzvah even though he didn't have kavana lotzes. So even though if a person blows shofar without kavana l'shem mitzvah, he's not yaitz. But if a person eats a kazayis matzah because his nana, he has hana, so memela he's yoytze the mitzvah of matzah even though he didn't have kavanah because shekain nana. That is how the Ran learns the Rambam, and memela gets the Mishnah learns like that as well, and memela the Magen Avraham Paskins as so the Mishabura says like this. The Mishabura is saying Amar the Kazach. The Mishabura is saying the same way that we paskin l'mais if a person eats matzah without kavanah he's yotze the mitzvah because of the svar of shekain nana, even without kavanah to be yotze the mitzvah. So who adin if a person eats a kazayis matzah in the sukkah, a kazayis in the sukkah the first night, since it's a midi da'achila and he's nana from his achilasai, so Mamela is going to be yotze the mitzvah of sukkah even without kavanah, as I state in the Mishnah Berurah. Now, before we go any further to try to understand this, I just want to shtell a ha'ara that l'chayra there is a ha'ara over here that the Bach said that there's a special kavanah that you have to have, and the Bach did not. The Bach did not say that what happened to the svara of shekain nana. So you might say the Bach doesn't hold to the svara of shekain nana l'dina at all. But l'chayra, according to the Mishnah Berurah that holds to the svara of shekain nana, that means the svara of the Bach l'chayra should be not relevant because you should have the svara of shekain nana. L'gabe the Bach's kavanah as well. Okay, we'll put the shayla on the side for a minute. Let's go back to this point. So again, the Mishnah Berurah says, we'll read these words again. The Mishnah Berurah says, "Kol zeh b'sharei mitzvahs." The halacha that you need kavanas b'shar mitzvah. Al mitzvah toli b'achila. Kain kazayis matzah v'pesach v'hu adin achilas kazayis b'sukkah b'layla rishayna. So das hashulchan aruch b'siman taf ayin esev dal d'yatza b'diavad. Where's the shayla? That's a very good shayla. What's the tushtal making something to a shaking kavanah? I'm going to try to explain it in a few minutes. It's a very, very good shayla. Okay, so before we get into what the actual havana of the svar of shekain nana, I want to mention that Reb Chaim is chaylik on this Mishnah Berurah, on this Bir Halacha. It's brought down. There's a sefer Asufas Rabbeinu Chaim Alevi. In Sukkah Siman Vav, it's brought down from Reb Chaim that Reb Chaim was chaylik. Reb Chaim said, "Allah l'maisa shekizayis b'sukkah b'layla rishon tzarich kavana lotzes ve'einoi doima lachilas kizayis matzah b'pesach sheyotze loy kavan." He says there's no comparison. Reb Chaim says there's no comparison between the mitzvah of achilas kizayis matzah that you're yotze without kavanah because of shekain nana, and the mitzvah to eat a kazayis of passing the sukkah b'layla rishayna. He says even though you're nana avad, you're not yotze without kavanah. And Reb Chaim explained like this. He said, "Matzah, the mitzvah is the chefetz of the achila. Achila eina tzricha kavanah. Kedisa b'sanhedrin ubekrisis misasim chalavim b'rayis chayiv shekain nana. Mashma the b'achila loy kavanah yesh kiyum mushlam. Achila without kavanah is called an achila. Masheike in Sukkah, says Reb Chaim, this is the lashon that's brought down. Hakiyum ha-mitzvah hu ha-yeshiva b'sukkah v'loy ha-achila. Reb Chaim says the mitzvah of achilas kazayis b'sukkah b'leil rishon is the mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah. It's not the mitzvah achila. Rak echu hakiyum shal ha-yeshiva b'sukkah al-yidei achila shal kazayis. V'achin exer shav tesvav rak shakiyum mitzvahs yeshiva b'sukkah al-yidei achilas kazayis. Reb Chaim says that there's no tzushtel b'chlal to the inyan of achilas kazayis matzah b'loy kavanah and achilas kazayis pas in the sukkah b'loy kavanah. Achilas kazayis matzah is a din achila. Reb Chaim says you're nena, it's called an achila. So you have the kiyum of the mitzvah achila. But he says that the mitzvah in the sukkah is l'chayra, it's a mitzvah yeshiva sukkah. It's a mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah. Avada the oifen that you're mekayim, the mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah is al yidei achilas pas. But the kiyum is achila b'sukkah. So he says they wouldn't pass the musig of shekain nana on achila b'sukkah. only something that the actual mitzvah is achila. When the mitzvah is to be mekayim your mitzvah sukkah al yedei achila, the hano that you have from the past would not say that it's a kiyam of achila b'sukkah b'kavanah al yedei the hano. So l'chayr we have an interessant machlokes between the Heilige Chafetz Chaim and Reb Chaim about if the svara of shekenena applies to the kazayis pass and the sukkah b'layla b'shayna other nisht. We have to touch up what the machlokes is. So I saw one mahalach, saw a beautiful mahalach in the Sefer Yerech L'Mayadim from the Lakewood Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Rucham Olshen Shlita, so the gesund sein, that he wanted to make the machlokes Reb Chaim and the Mishnah Berurah Tali if the mitzvahs achilas kazayis b'sukkah b'layla rishon is be'ikar a mitzvahs achila or it's be'ikar a mitzvahs yeshiva sukkah. There's a lot of read about this. It's not the topic it's not the gang that I would like to go with, but there's a famous chakir from Reb Baruch Ber in the back of the third chelik of the Chedushay Shiurei Reb Baruch Ber. It's brought down a chakir from Reb Baruch Ber that in the special mitzvahs achilas pas that we have to eat a kazayas of pas b'layla rishon and sukkahs, that we learn out from tesvav from matzah. Is it just that we learn out from tesvav that there's a din to be mekayim, the din of yeshiva sukkah b'layla rishon b'tayris chiv, and the pas is the hechet timtza? And Memeiler Baruch Ber says if that would be the case, there would be no problem. Let's say if the pas is a mitzvah bo ba'avera, because the pas is nothing more than hechet timtza. The ikar is the kiyam, the mitzvah yeshiva sukkah. It's a din yeshiva like the rest of sukkahs, but sukkah is teishvu. The pas is the hechet timtza, and how I have to mekayim the mitzvah yeshiva sukkah. But after there's a mahalach, Baruch Ber declares that we learn out from tesvav that there's a special din achila b'layla rishayim. It's different than the mitzvah yeshiva sukkah. And you could be mafalpul in the machlokes rishayim about the Torah of mitzvah and about the shir of kazayas or kibeya. There's a lot to be mafalpul about what exactly the geder of the mitzvahs achilas kazayas b'layla harishayin is in the sukkah. So the Yeshiva Rabbi Yerucham wants to say a mahalach that the Mishnah Berurah holds that the mitzvahs achilas kazayas b'layla harishayin in the sukkah is be'ikar of mitzvahs achilas pas. Gradly, it's a t'nai that it has to be in the sukkah. But as long as there's pas in the sukkah, the mitzvahs achilas pas. And memela it's mamish like kazayas, it's a mitzvahs achila. And memela it would pass the svar of shekein nen. Masha Enkin Reb Chaim understands that be'ikar it's a mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah, and the pas is mernish the hechet timtza. So if the pas is mernish the hechet timtza, so then memela avada there's no shekeinen on the pas, because the pas is it's not a mitzvah achila, it's a mitzvah yeshiva. There would have to be a shekeinen on the sukkah, but not a shekeinen on the would not be a shekeinen on the pas. That's one mahalach that we could go. It's a geshmaka mahalach, and there are other mashmoisin. The Mata Ephraim says the same thing that the Mishnah Berurah says. This chiddush that the Mishnah Berurah says that there's a svara of shekein nena, on the achilas kazayis b'layla rishon and sukkahs, that a person could be yaitz even without kavanah shekein nena like matzah. So the Mata Ephraim says this as well. And there's a lot of nice rayas that the Mata Ephraim holds that the gather of the mitzvahs achilas pas be kazayis rishon and the sukkah b'layla harishayin is a mitzvah, is begeder a mitzvah achila. The Mata Ephraim asked that there should be a separate mitzvah besides the mitzvah of leishin b'sukkah. There should be a mitzvah of al achila b'sukkah b'layla harishayin. He says that they were nichlalit in the mitzvah of in the bracha of leishin b'sukkah, where the Mata Ephraim says this type of problem mitzvah bo ba'avera in the past. So this would be after a geshmaka mahalach in the machlekes between Reb Chaim and the Mishnah Berurah. L'maisa, I wanted to suggest another mahalach. I think that if it would be a pashta din achilas pas, then it would be a geshmaka mahalach to make this chiluk. L'maisa, the way Reb Chaim is asking it is that's pashut, except for a shver marshal, but that's pashut that the The din of achila kazayis rishon is a din in the sukkah. It has to be a kazayis rishon in the sukkah. Even if it's a special halacha that we learn out from matzah, and it doesn't have a p'tur of mitzvah, soif kol soif, it's a din of achila b'sukkah. So l'chayra, Chaim is asking l'chayra very stark shaila, even if it's a din achila, it's not a pashta din achila. The din is not that I have to have the bas. The din is that I have to have a kim v'achilu b'sukkah. So how could we make it sushtel? How could the Mishnah Berurah make it sushtel? It's not a pashta sushtel. Reb Chaim is saying. Reb Chaim is saying that even if it's a din of achilas pas b'layla b'shayna, but it's a din of achilas pas b'sukkah. I saw that it's brought down. Reb Shlomo Zalman said that even if a person is nena from the pas, he's not nena from the sukkah. The mitzvah is the achila b'sukkah. He's asking that l'chayra, even if the mitzvah is the achila b'sukkah, so l'chayra, by matzah we have a halacha that if the mitzvah is to eat the matzah and the etzem achila is a davar sheyesh b'hana, so then a person can be mekayim the mitzvah even without kavanah. L'chayra over here it's different. It's a ma'isa of achila b'sukkah. It's not just a pashat achila. Reb Chaim is saying that if it's not just a pashat achila, we don't have a right to shtel to the halacha of shekeinen. And the Mishnah Berurah is saying that we could shtel to. I would like to suggest another mahalach, and we'll see maybe nafkaminas with this mahalach as well. It was asked, we have to understand, in order to understand the machlekes Reb Chaim and the Mishnah Berurah, I think we have to understand the etzem musig of the mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, that a person would be able to mekayim a mitzvah by midid da'achila even without kavanah al yedei that he has hana. And the Rishonim shtaltzu, the Ra and Rashi, they shtaltzu the musig of misasik b'chalovim v'arayis chayiv shekeinen. Now, l'chayra, this tzushtal is a pella. We have a halacha that in order for a person to be mechuyev to bring a carbon, he has to be a shaygig. If he's mamish a misasik, a person that does something but misasik, he does it ma'isa completely without intent. He's walking past the wall and his shoulder brushes a light switch, it turns on the light. That's b'chlal, he didn't even, it's not miyuchas to the gavra b'chlal. Something that was done by a person's body without any intent whatsoever is a chesaron in the ikar ma'isa of the gavra. That's not even called a shaygig. If a person is nena, so it's enough to be called Meshayg. Now, Lamaisa, he's not called a Mezid, he's not called a Mechavein. He's not called a Mechavein. Person wouldn't be Chayiv Nisa, wouldn't be Chayiv in Einish. It's only enough to make him into a Shaykh to be Chayiv a carbon. Now, my mitzvah's tzrichas kavanah, the halacha is that a person needs kavanah lotzes. He has to have kavanah lotzes. That's the kavanah that he's doing this mitzvah in order to be Yaitzi Yedei Chevasa. He needs an active kavanah. How can we shtel to the musig? What's b'chlal the svara to shtel to this musig of misasik b'chalav b'rayis chayiv shekein nena, to shtel it to the musig of to be able to mekayim a mitzvah without kavan? So l'chayra we find two mahalchim to be able to understand the etzem svara of misasik b'chalav b'rayis chayiv shekein nena, and these two mahalchim are applicable to be two explanations in this svara of the Ran, of the Rambam, that when there's shekei nena, a person can be mekayim the mitzvah even without kavanah because of shekei nena. There's one svara that of what's the musig of misasa b'chalav v'arayis chayiv shekei nena that's brought down in the Bercha Shmuel in Kedushin Siman Chaf b'shem Reb Chaim. Reb Baruch Ber explains that there's two types of averis. He says there's a type of avera that's tali in a maisa. An avera that's tali in a maisa. Marshal, a person does a maisa malacha on Shabbos. Maisa malacha has to have a chashivas. There's all sorts of dinim in the maisa malacha. It has to be malachas machsheves. It has to be constructive. I think the Taich Reb Sham Shafal Hirsch says malachas machsheves is constructive creativity, I believe. It has to be mechaven, and a person does a certain maisa. He says ritzicha. Ritzicha is a certain maisa that a person does. A maisa be a daim shala gavra. A person accomplishes a certain accomplishment. That's the avera of ritzicha. He says that there are certain types of averas that the avera is not a maisa. The avera is the mitzias of the hana. He says that the isser to eat chaylev is not to do an action of eating chaylev. In fact, as Reb Chaim, it's again for Kodshim, Reb Chaim makes the point that it's hard to pinpoint exactly at which point an act of achila takes place. A person puts it in his mouth and starts chewing. The act of achila isn't finished. He starts swallowing. before it's through the Beis Habliya, so then it hasn't yet been eaten. After it passes the Beis Habliya, it's already been eaten. Okay, this is a side point, but the Baruch Ber says the Isser, the Avera of eating chaylev, is not the action of the Gavra doing an action, a Maisa of eating. The Isser of chaylev is to be nene from chaylev. The lashon that Baruch Ber said is reibsich by emen gargle. The Isser is the etzem mitzias of the Hana, that he has a Hana, this the Hana Sachila, the mitzias of the chaylev going down his throat. That is the Isser of chaylev. Same thing with Arayis. It's not the Maisa Arayis, it's the Hanas Arayis. The mitzias of his guf being nene from the erva in a Maisa Bia, that's the Isser of Arayis. So Rav explains that's the musig of misasik b'chalav of Arayis chayiv shekein, and he brings b'shem Reb Chaim. He says when a person, let's say, does l'mashal a different malacha, a malachas Shabbos, or he does a Maisa Ritzicha, he does an Aver that's totally b'maisa. If a person does an Aver that's totally b'maisa, and he does it with, a person does an Aver that's totally b'maisa, and he does the Aver that's totally b'maisa b'misasek, so then it's a chesaron in his Maisa. The Maisa is not miyuchas to him, because he did it without intent. His guf did the Maisa, but the Gavra, there's a chesaron in the Asiyah of the Maisa. It was just done b'misasek. It happened b'meila. It didn't happen b'kavanah. It's a chesaron in the Asiyah ha'Maisa. B'meila, it's chaser in the Maisa. As that Maisa is nishkein shleik, it's not machayev a carbon. But Aver that's not totally in a Maisa, if the Aver is not totally in the Maisa, b'meila, such an Aver that's not totally in the Maisa, so then even if a person wasn't misasik, the mitzias of the Avera is the Hana. Soif kol soif. Did he eat the chaylev? Yes. Did the chaylev go in his throat? Yes. Seraipsach bayam and gargle. If a person does an Avera that's not totally in Maisa, there's no chesaron in the Avera that it was done by misasik. L'maisa he did it. L'maisa it's a shaygig. Avadli is not amazed. But Lamaisa, he has an achila shlema because he has the mitzias of that enough. So he's mechayiv to bring a carbon. The way that Reb Chaim is saying it, the way Reb Chaim is bringing from Reb Chaim, he's saying it is an avera that's totally in Maisa has a chesaron of misasik. An avera that's a mitzias of hanas agof, there's no chesaron of misasik, because misasik is only chesaron in a Maisa. The mitzias of the hana, he has with misasik, not with misasik, with kavanah, without kavanah, he has the mitzias of that hana. He did that avera. In the middle, he has to bring a carbon. That's the musig of misasik b'chalom v'arayis chayiv shekeinen. Now, according to this understanding, the tzushtel to mitzvahs would have to be a similar kind of idea. The tzushtel to mitzvahs would have to be that by a mitzvah, what's the mitzvah of achilas matzah? Is the mitzvah of achilas matzah for a person to pick up the matzah and do a ma'isa achila in the matzah? Just like there's a mitzvah l'mashal l'kichas l'ulav l'kach and l'chem. Person has to do a ma'isa l'kicha. If he did a ma'isa l'kicha b'misasik, there would be a chesaron. He didn't do the ma'isa l'kicha that he has to do. But achilas matzah, Ken Zogin, that the mitzvah of achilas matzah is not to do a ma'isa, an action of an act of eating. The mitzias of being nene from the matzah, as long as the matzah went into him, so Reibsach Bayam and Gargle, he ate the matzah, he has the mitzias of the Hanos Goyer Umeyav of the matzah. That's the key of the mitzvah of matzah. So what do we say? We say there's a halacha mitzvah strichas kavanah. In order for a person to be yaitza ma'isa mitzvah, he has to do the ma'isa mitzvah with kavanah. It's a din in the asiyas ma'isa mitzvah that he has to do it with kavanah. Ken Zogin, that the Ran is being mechadish, that's only that t'nai, that a mitzvah has to be done with kavanah in order to be yaitza, is only a t'nai in a ma'isa mitzvah, that the kiyum is through a type of asiyah, is through a ma'isa. But if the kiyum is the etzem mitzias of the hana, that he just has to eat it, so then the mitzvah is that he has to have an achilas matzah. So if he has an achilas matzah, he's mekayim the mitzvah. So there's a lashon, I found this a lashon in the Pri Chadash. The Pri Chadash in Tofayin Dalet, Tofayin Hesivkat and Dalet, he says a lashon like this: Me'ata huzkak lechalek bein midi de is bein maisa, lemidi de less bein maisa. He says that if there's a mitzvah that's less bein maisa, if there's a mitzvah that doesn't require a maisa at all, Pasha, the mitzvah is that he should have the hana of the achilas matzah. So then, by bazai, there wouldn't be a din. Bekitzer, the halacha of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. Kavanah is a maila and a t'nai in what kind of maisa? There's an act. A maisa has to be done, has a certain chashivas. If it's done with kavanah lotzes, that's a maila in the maisa. Masha'en kain, a mitzvah, that the mitzvah is not a maisa b'chlal. The mitzvah is just the hanas achila. So as long as he had the hanas achila, is mekayim the mitzvah without the maisa. That's how we could understand the musig of Mesasek b'chalav and Varayis Chayev Shekein Nena being a tzushtel, that who had done a mitzvah, that the mitzvah is a mitzvah of achila, you're yaitz even without it. Now, l'chayra, according to this Havana, Reb Chaim is mamish gerecht, and I think that's mamish the lashon that Reb Chaim says. If you read the lashon of Reb Chaim in the Sufas Rabbeinu Chaim Alevi, listen to the lashon. He says, "Eined daim elachilas kazayis matzah bepesach sheyitzel loik Havana, ubir de matzah mitzvasa achila, va'achila eina tzricha kavana." By matzah, the mitzvah is achila, hanas achila. Va'achila eina tzricha kavana. Achila doesn't require kavana. There's no musig of kavana by achila, because achila is not an action that you do that it's more miyuchas to you if you do it. Achila is just a hana. Mashma achila leloi kavana yesh kiyum mushlam. Achila without kavana is the same thing. It's the same hanas achila. Mashake in sukkah kiyum mitzvah yeshiva b'sukkah v'loi achila. Sukkah is a ma'isa mitzvah. You have to do a ma'isa of yeshiva b'sukkah. Just because the way that you do the ma'isa achila b'sukkah is al yidei a ma'isa achila, so if it's a ma'isa, it needs kavanah. So l'chayru, we can understand very gishmak Reb Chaim, l'shitasa, according to this understanding that Reb Bachber brings from Reb Chaim, Mesasek b'chalav v'rayis chayev shekein nena. L'maisa, there's another understanding in Mesasek b'chalav v'rayis chayev shekein nena. If you look in Rashi, on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis in Sanhedrin, where the Gemara brings the halacha of Mesasek b'chalav v'rayis chayev shekein nena, Rashi says shekein nena, you had hana, hilkach chashav b'kavanah. If a person is nena, when he's doing the maisa, it's chashav b'kavanah. It's chashav that he did it b'kavanah. Now this is the chayra, a very shvar lashon. It's certainly l'chayra. Rashi does not sound at all like Reb Chaim, because Reb Chaim is saying, of course, when a person eats something without kavanah, he didn't have kavanah. But Reb Chaim is saying we don't care about any chesaron kavanah. Chesaron of kavanah is only a chesaron when a person does a maisa, when there's a mitzvah that you need to do a certain type of asiyah. So if you do it without kavanah, it's a weak asiyah. A person does an act without intent, it's a weak act. It's not an act. When it's just a hana is not any less of a hana if a person did it with intent or without intent. An action is not an action if it's done without intent. That's not what Rashi's saying. Rashi's saying if you're nene, it's chashav kavanah, it's chashav din kavanah. And there's a different Berach Shmuel in Ksubas, Siman Yud Alpha, Siman Yud Beis, where he's medayik in a Taisus over there in Sanhedrin Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis. In one teretz, Taisus has it said that if a person would do a meleches Shabbos in a way that he would have hana, then even if he would do it without kavanah, the very fact that he was hana, it would maybe be enough to be considered that he should be chayv by meleches Shabbos. The point is, again, we see this idea that if a person does a maisa without kavanah, but he's nena when he does the maisa, it's like he had kavanah. Now, what's the musig? What is this supposed to mean? L'chayra person, l'chayra we have to say like this. There's a lashon in the Mishnah Brura. If you look in the Mishnah Brura, it's the Bir Halacha, the previous Bir Halacha, in the middle of the previous Bir Halacha, it's in the middle of the Bra Maschel, Yesh Eimer She'en Mitzvah Tzrichas Kavanah. In the middle of the language of that Bir Halacha, he says such a lashon. He says, and he says a lashon. Binyane achila machmes hanoshem nena loinucha lebatel asiyosai ki ilu loy asa v'nechshav hadover ki ilu miskave. Binyane achila machmes hanoshem nena loinucha lebatel asiyosai ki ilu loy asa The nechshav hadavar ki ilu miskave. That's the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah. I think if you're ma'ayin in the lashon, the Mishnah Berurah is saying a svara like this. He's saying a different svara. It's a dakistic svara. We said before that the concept of misasek is when a person does a maisa without intent, without kavanah. So even though the person's guf may have done it, my shoulder brushed the light switch, my guf may have turned on the light, but I, the gavra, didn't do it. The svara of misasek is that what happened is not miyuchas to me. It's not miyuchas to my asiyah, because something that was done without kavana is not miyuchas to the asiyah of the gavra. I'm not in the maisa. I didn't do that. Now, there's a svara that when a person is nena, you can't say that it's not miyuchas to me. Usually, misasik, we say, even though my guf did it, I didn't do it because I did it below kavana. But no, if a person was nena from it, you can't be mavatal dasiyah. It's a svara of his yachsos that the maisa is miyuchas to me. If I was nena from the maisa, we can't say that the maisa is not miyuchas to me. Because if I was nena from it, you're going to say, when I didn't eat the matzah, I ate the matzah, it filled me up. So there's a svara when it's nena that the maisa is miyuchas to me afal piking. So this is a ganze andere svara. It's a ganze andere svara. Ganze andere svara is a svar like this, that there's a chesaron in Avera. A person can only be called a shayging if he did the Avera and the Avera is miyuchas to him. If he does it without kavanah, it's not called he did it at all. If he's nene, the Avera is miyuchas to him. We can sagen that that's a zushtal to mitzvahs as well. That's what the Bir Allah is learning. It's a zushtal to mitzvahs as well. That if a person's ma'isa mitzvah, always, there's a lashon of the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara uses a lashon, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah in two places, on Daf Chav Ches and the Beis, and later on Daf Lamed Beis. The Gemara uses a lashon that, according to Madar Mitzvah Tzrichas Kavanah, if a person does a mitzvah without kavanah, it's kimis asek. What's the svara? The svara l'chayra is that a ma'isa mitzvah isn't just a physical act. The ma'isa mitzvah is the chashivas of the ma'isa mitzvah. We call it the tzivui of the boirei, the ceremonial act, the chashivas that the ma'isa has as a tzivui of the boirei shabai. If a person blows a shofar, he's trying to make noise. The Tekiyah Shal Mitzvah, that chashivas that's in this ma'isa of a Tekiyah Shal Mitzvah, if he didn't have in mind to do it as that, it's not miyuchas to him. The Tekiyah Shal Mitzvah, he did it without kavanas mitzvah, so maybe it's like misasek. We're not miyachas, he didn't do the Tekiyah Shal Mitzvah. Maybe he blew a noise, but he didn't have in mind to make a Tekiyah. So even though a Tekiyah has happened, but it's not miyuchas to him because it was done without kavanah. But there's a svara, same thing. If a person eats matzah, he ate unleavened bread, he ate a cracker. He didn't have in mind to do the achilas matzah, the chashivas of achilas matzah shal mitzvah, that ma'isa mitzvah, tzivei abayri, that chashivas of the ma'isa. If he did it without intent, so then it's not miyuchas to him. There's a svara that shekein nene, that the same way we say, if he's nene from the avera, any yachal levatel mimenu asiyasai, there's the same way to say that if he's nene from the mitzvah and yachal levatel mimenu asiyasai, and the ma'isa mitzvah shabai is miyuchas to him, it's not called misasek. That's the svara, and that's how the Mishnah Berurah is learning. Any yachal levatel mimenu asiyasai hayol v'nene. If that's the svara, so after mekan zogen that that's the pshat in the Bir Halacha, that the Bir Halacha is saying. The Bir Halacha is saying that who adin the achilas kazayis in the sukkah the sukkah the laila harishon, the achilas kazayis in the sukkah laila harishon. Again, the mitzvah avada is the idik kazayis in the sukkah. What's the ma'isa mitzvah? How are you mekayim the ma'isa mitzvah? You're mekayim the ma'isa mitzvah, the ma'isa dira ayidei the achilas kazayis. So after mekan zogen azay, Reb Chaim understood. It's not the pshat that when you're nene, it's like you're mechaven in the ma'isa. Reb Chaim understood when the mitzvah is just to have a certain hana, then it doesn't pass a chasar and kavanah. The whole din mitzvah tzrichas kavanah wasn't said by mitzvahs that are about hana. He says matzah is a mitzvah of hana. Sukkah is not a mitzvah of hana. Yeah, the way you do the Maisa mitzvah is by eating challah with honey in the sukkah. But the mitzvah is not the challah. The mitzvah is sitting in the sukkah. There's no such halacha that you could be avada. That would have the mitzvah, the din of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, and the fact that you're nana doesn't make a difference. But Kenzai the Mishabrura is understanding that no, the din of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah is a halacha. The din of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah is a halacha in his yachsus. Every time a person does a mitzvah without kavanah lotzes, he's misasek legabe the maisa mitzvah. If he didn't have kavanah to do it as a mitzvah, the Torah's maisa mitzvah is not miyuchas to him, unless he's mechaven that he's doing it to do the maisa mitzvah. But there's a svara. The svara is shekein nene, that whenever my maisa mitzvah is a zam maisa mitzvah that I'm nene, so the mishabura any yachal levatel mimenu asiyasa, and it's miyuchas to him. Oy bazoi, any maisa mitzvah that the maisa mitzvah is a mitzvah sheyesh boyhana is taka miyuchas, and it's not called kilulay asa. So memela we are miyuchas to him at the maisa of achila bisukah, which is a maisa sheyesh boyhana avadi he could have a kiyum. So I want to be masbid that that's taka the machlokes Reb Chaim and the Mishabura about achilas kazayas rishon is totally on their havana in the machlokes about the whole musig of what the svar of shekein nen is and what the chesron of misasik chalog and varayis is shekein nen. Actually, I think it's a beer. By the way, there's a say this thing of machlokes about maror. If a person eats maror without kavanah, is a yaitza. So Reb Kiveger brings from the Pri Megadim that no. Person eats maror with that kavanah. Maror is bitter. You don't have hana from maror. You don't have hana from maror. You wouldn't say the svar of shekein nene by maror. The Ksav Sofer in the Tshuva writes that no, maror is achila. What do I care if it's bitter or if it's sweet? Maror is achila, and in midid achila you don't need kavanah. What's the machlokes between the Ksav Sofer and Rabbi Kiveger? L'chayra, it's the same machlokes. The Ksav Sofer understands the svar of shekein nene is anything that's achila doesn't have any din kavanah. If maror is a din of achila, what do I care if it tastes bitter and I don't have hana? The point is not the hana. The point is that achila is not something that is a better achila or a worse achila if I'm mechaven. Achila is the mitzvah of the hana, and I got the mitzvah or the avera if I have the achila. So memela, he understands that maror also passes the svar of shekein nene. Mashenkin Kenzain and Rabbi Kiveger understood. I'll direct the Pri Megadim. Rabbi Kiveger and the Pri Megadim understand that the svara is that the hana is miyachas the ma'isa mitzvah to you, saying by maror that there's no hana. Just because it's an achila, but an achila below hana, there's no svar. I didn't get the hana, so avada were miyach, avada were vatal the ma'isa mitzvah. Oh, now. So I want to maybe see if we can go back and with these sites that we just took out from over here. This is really a different bifnei atzma. But now I want to go back to the kasha that we asked on the Bach. You see, let's talk about the svara that we just said. Let's talk about the svara that we just said in Legabe Rashi, or even in the svara in Reb Chaim. We're saying that always a chesaron kavana is a chesaron in a maisa. What is the din that you have to be mechaven for mitzvahs? We could clear a basic shaila. Maybe we should have started off the shir with this chakira. The basic halacha of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, you have to be mechaven when you're mekayim a mitzvah. What's that din? Is it a din of the kiyama mitzvah or is it a din of the maisa mitzvah? Is it a din that I'm not mekayim a mitzvah if I don't have kavanah, or is it a din that there's a chesaron in my maisa mitzvah if I do it without kavanah? The whole Torah that we've been just saying right now, to understand the whole svara, that ayidei hana, either you don't need kavanah or it belibes like kavanah. That's all because we understand that doing a maisa mitzvah without kavanah is a chesaron in the maisa mitzvah. At the maisa mitzvah, there's a chesaron. If I do a maisa without intent, so then the tekiyah shal mitzvah, the achila shal mitzvah, the maisa is not miyuchas to me. So then we could say that if a person has hana, so then either there's no chesaron of the kavanah like Reb Chaim, or the fact that I have hana means the ma'isa mitzvah is miyuchas to me, is associated. It's called my ma'isa mitzvah because of the hana. That's all. Let's say there was a gzeres hakasum that a person can't be mekayim a mitzvah unless you have in mind to be mekayim a mitzvah. Hana would have no shaychus. It would mamish have no shaychus. Clearly, the svara of hana would never be a svara b'chlal in a din kavana that would be a t'nai to be mekayim a mitzvah. And the Torah says you're only mekayim a mitzvah when you want to be mekayim a mitzvah, when you had in mind to be mekayim a mitzvah. What would hana have anything to do with it? Hana is only a svara to get rid of a chesaron of misasek, a chasar in the Maisa mitzvah. If kavanah is a din in the kiyama mitzvah, their avada hana is not has no shaykhs. So in Bezai, it's pashut l'chayra. The Bach was machadish that when the Torah says when you have to sit in the sukkah, you don't just have to sit in the sukkah. You have to sit in the sukkah l'man yedu de'reisechem ki b'sukkah se'shavti es b'nei Yisrael. What kind of din is that? Is that a din of the Maisa mitzvah? No. L'chayra, that's a din that in order to mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah, there's a special halacha, you need l'man yedu de'reisechem. There's a matara of the mitzvah, l'man yedu de'reisechem. If that's the case, so it's pashut that even if there's a svar of shekain nene to be yaitza the regular din of achilas kazayas b'sukkah, to be yaitza the regular din of achilas kazayas b'sukkah, mitzvah tzrichas kavanah yedei hana. But for the bachs halakha, you'd have to have mefersha kavanah. That's the chayra, I think, a davar de mistavra. So now I think we can go to Miyashav, the kasha that Rav Bamberger asked, and the kasha that we asked from the Gemara by Moitzi Tefillin. The Gemara says that the halacha of Bal Tosef and the halacha of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah is haba talia. I'm going to speak it out in the case of tefillin because it's easier to speak out that way. If you need kavanah to be yaitze the mitzvah, then it's only Bal Tosef if you wear 2 pairs of tefillin with kavanah. And if you wear 2 pairs of tefillin without kavanah, there's no Bal Tosef because you didn't wear 2 pairs of tefillin. Tefillin without kavanah is not called you wore 2 pairs of tefillin. Masha'en came, the Gemara says, if you hold mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, the etzem mitzias that you have the tefillin on your head is called tefillin. It's called you being mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin even without kavanah. So then, if you put on 2 pairs of tefillin even without kavanah, you're over Bal Tosef. That's what the Gemara says. What's the connection between mitzvah tzrichas kavanah to be yaitza mitzvah and kavanah to be over Bal Tosef? So famous shtickler of Shlomo Hayman, Rav Shlomo says it's because that the din of kavanah, according to the Madar mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, is required to have a ma'isa mitzvah. He says it a little different than we said, but the yesod is the same. If you learn mitzvah tzrichas kavanah means that without kavanah, there's a chesaron in your ma'isa mitzvah. So that means if you put on tefillin without kavanah, it's not called tefillin. So Mela, if your mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, if you put on tefillin without kavanah, it's not tefillin. So 2 pairs of tefillin is not Bal Tosef. Masha'en came, if your mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, that means that even without kavanah, there's no chesaron in your ma'isa mitzvah. It's called you did a ganza ma'isa mitzvah even without kavanah. There's no chesaron of misasek. And you put on tefillin without kavanah, it's called you put on a pair of tefillin. So you put on 2 pairs of tefillin without kavanah. Avada, you did 2 ma'isa mitzvahs. That's Bal Tosef. That's Bal Tosef. That's the pshat of the Gemara. Now, what about this new din of the Bach? We said the Bach says that you're not mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin. According to the B'gur Yaakov, you're not mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin if you don't have kavanah of l'man tiyah teres Hashem b'ficha. If you didn't have kavanah, you didn't say the whole Hashem yichud, you didn't have kavanah to be that you're putting on tefillin l'man tiyah teres Hashem b'ficha. So then you're not mekayim the mitzvah of tefillin. We're saying that's a din of the kiyama mitzvah. L'chayra, that's not mailu moirid in the ma'isa mitzvah. When a person is doing Bal Tosef, he's never getting a kiyama mitzvah. He's never getting a kiyama mitzvah. So what do we ask? We ask the kasha. How could the Gemara say that according to the Manda Amar, mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah, you could wear 2 pairs of tefillin because it's not Bal Tosef because you put it on without kavanah. But according to the Manda Amar, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. The minute you put on 2 pairs of tefillin, you're over Bal Tosef because it's 2 pairs of tefillin. So we ask the kasha. There's no such thing as the Manda Amar mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah by tefillin. According to the Bach, according to the B'gur Yaakov, everybody holds you're not yaitz the mitzvah of tefillin unless you have kavanah l'man tiyah teres Hashem b'ficha. So whenever you put on tefillin, automatically you're not yaitz the mitzvah of tefillin if you didn't have kavanah. So l'chayra, there shouldn't be any Bal Tosef until you shouldn't be any Bal Tosef unless you have kavanah l'man tiyah teres Hashem b'ficha. I want to say that no, that kavanah, the kavanah of l'man tiyah teres Hashem b'ficha, has no shaykhus to Bal Tosef. The only kavanah that has shaykhus to Bal Tosef is the kavanah of mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah or mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. That's a kavanah that either makes it into a ma'isa mitzvah or it's misasik without it. if you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, then putting on tefillin without kavanah is misasik. You didn't do tefillin, so then you can put on 2 pairs. It's not bal taisif. If you hold mitzvah ain't tzrichas kavanah, it's a perfectly good wearing of tefillin. It's a mice of wearing tefillin. The minute you do 2 meisim of wearing tefillin, you're over bal taisif. There's another halacha that in order to be mekayim a mitzvah, in order to be mekayim the mitzvah, you need kavanah. In order to mekayim the mitzvah, you need a special extra kavanah. That doesn't make any difference legabe bal taisif. It's the point that Rabbi Snyder just asked, that this is actually the side to this comes from Rav Shlomo Hyman's famous shtickle Torah. What if you have kavanah not to be yaitza? This is the famous kasha that Turi Evan asks. The Turi Evan asks a kasha. He says, how could the Gemara say, according to the Madar Mitzvahs, ain't tzrichas kavanah, that the minute you put on 2 pairs of tefillin, you're automatically over bal taisif? He says, put on 2 pairs of tefillin and have specific kavanah not to be yaitza the mitzvah, and then you're not doing bal taisif. Rav Shlomo says, the din that if you have kavanah not to be yaitza, you're not yaitza. That does not destroy the ma'aseh mitzvah. That doesn't make it not a ma'aseh mitzvah. That's a special din in the kiyum mitzvah. He says this halacha that even according to the Mandal Amar mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah, that you could be mekayim a mitzvah without kavanah. This halacha that if you have specific intent not to be yaitza the mitzvah, you're not yaitza. That's a din in your kiyum mitzvah. If a person does a mitzvah and he specifically doesn't want to be mekayim his mitzvah, he's not mekayim his mitzvah. Rav Shlomo says if a person puts on 2 pairs of tefillin, according to the Mother Mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah, and he says, I don't want to be yaitza the mitzvah, he's still over bal taisif. There's no yaitza the mitzvah to wear 2 pairs of tefillin. There's no mitzvah to wear 2 pairs of tefillin. Bal taisif means you're not allowed to do 2 meisim of mitzvahs. So if you put on 2 pairs of tefillin, according to the Mother Mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah, you were over bal taisif. You did 2 meisim mitzvahs. You had kavanah not to be yaitza. You're never yaitza. You did 2 meisim mitzvahs. You're over bal taisif. So similarly, he said, according to the mitzvah, tzrichas kavanah, if you put on 2 pairs of tefillin without kavanah, you didn't do 2 ma'aseh mitzvahs. So then it's not bal taisif. But according to the mitzvah, ain't tzrichas kavanah. You don't need kavanah for it to be a ma'aseh mitzvah. You put on 2 pairs of tefillin. You did bal taisif. You don't have kavanah to be yaitza. I have kavanah not to be yaitza. That doesn't make a difference. Huadin, the fact that you didn't have kavanah for this extra kavanah of the bach wouldn't make a difference. You still be bal taisif. So getting back to the final question, Yoshem b'shmini b'sukkah. The Gemara says, according to the Mother Mitzvahs, tzrichas kavanah, if you go into a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres and you don't have kavanah to be yaitza, you're not over bal taisif. According to the Mother Mitzvahs, ain't tzrichas kavanah, if you go into a sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, then you should be automatically over bal taisif. Frek the Würzburger Rav, what do you mean? According to the Bach, as long as you didn't have a special kavanah, anyways, you're not yaitza the mitzvah, so it shouldn't be bal taisif. The answer is that kavanah is a din to be yaitza the mitzvah. The fact that you didn't have kavanah to be yaitza, you never yaitza the mitzvah on Shmini Atzeres. That kavanah wouldn't make any difference to Gabi bal taisif. The only kavanah that makes a difference for bal taisif is the kavanah of mitzvah tzrichas kavanah. If you hold mitzvah tzrichas kavanah, that means going into a sukkah without kavanah to be yaitza is misasik. So if you go into the kavanah on Shmini Atzeres without kavanah to be yaitza the mitzvah, it's misasik. So mainly you didn't do a ma'aseh mitzvah, so it's not bal taisif. According to the Mandal Amar, mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. If you walk into a sukkah, you did a ma'aseh mitzvah. You walk into a sukkah Shmini Atzeres, you did a ma'aseh mitzvah. It's bal taisif. You didn't have the special kavanah l'man yedu deresechem. That's irrelevant on Shmini Atzeres. Irrelevant Shmini Atzeres. Anyways, there's no mitzvah to be mekayim a mitzvah. The bal taisis are doing the ma'aseh mitzvah. If you did the ma'aseh mitzvah, avada, so the avada it's bal taisis. So the Gemara is kamin chaimer, and it's a very good yishuv to the B'kur Yankov's kasha. Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Say. I couldn't mic.
Big HSukkah, Rabbi Stern. Thank you very, very much for beautiful